Dad, welcome back.
It's good to be back, son. How are you?
I'm wonderful. It's time for us again to share in some conversations about the lessons we have learned and are learning. You learning new stuff in life, Dad? You still learning at this stage and age in your life?
Man, I seem like I'm learning more now than I've ever learned before. I know more now than I've ever known. So, yes, indeed, I'm still learning. And my granddad would say, you learn until you leave here.
Wow. You
Yep.
learn until you leave. I
You
love
learn.
that, Dad. I'm excited that we are here. We do this every first Sunday at
Mhm.
8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And let's take a minute. We're going to ask everybody who's here, share this. We want to be sure to invite our friends and family to just hop in with us and share in some of this time of growth and development. I'm excited every time we just get to talk in this public space like we often do in private, just to reflect on the lessons that we're learning in life. And I think one thing for us to begin with tonight, Dad, is that life is lived best when we take learning and living what we've learned more seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we learn what we have, when we learn to take what we got,
Yeah.
practice it, believe it. I
Yeah.
have one of my sayings is believe the gauges of life.
Wow.
Believe the gauges. Life has gauges, just like automobiles have gauges.
Say more.
And life has, automobiles have running hot lights. They have check engine lights. They have coolant lights. And
Wow.
life has lights. Life has gauges.
Yes, sir.
And I think you have to believe the gauges of life. Sometimes life tell you when you like the gauges will tell you when you're on the right road. They'll tell you when you're making good decisions. They'll tell you when you're not on the right road. And so one of the things I've learned is to trust the gauges of life. When I sense that this is not good, I don't second guess that sense. I believe it the first time.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's great. You certainly taught me that about automobiles and life. That signs from the gauges, the lights of life, are our indication to spend the time and energy now so that you save later. Because if you try to save now, it's going to cost you later. If you try to skimp and save on integrity, on godliness, on wisdom and logic now, it's going to cost you later.
It's going to cost you later.
If you will spend the energy and the time and the investment of integrity and those positive things, making wise choices now, it will pay you later.
Yeah.
You can pay now or pay. Life is like Amazon. You can pay now or pay later, but that life is going to cost us something sometimes.
It's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you something. And it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be to the point that we run into bad. We're going to talk about some things tonight that occurred in Memphis, and that's a good segue that we're on about the gauges, trusting your heart.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about some of those things as we move forward.
Before we transition to the weightier things that are more immediate. Hey, everybody, I see y'all coming in. Will you at least say hello in the comment section? Let us know you're here. And if you're on Facebook, click share. Help us to get the word out that we're on tonight. Dad, I want to first start. We didn't even talk about this piece, but this is our February edition. We do this on the first Sunday night every month. And I want to kick us off this month talking about the benefit of Black history in our lives, the lessons we're living and have learned from those who've come before us. I always marvel, Dad, at the way you have been able to use the lessons from those you've known as legends as far as ministry, business, or what have you. I see our families coming on. Hey, y'all. And so, Dad, I always marvel at how you apply the wisdom that you have gained. So in the spirit of Black history, let's start there and talk about some of the stuff we have gleaned, maybe from people who are no longer even alive. You can talk about relatives or people you admire from afar or up close. But let's hear some of that wisdom that you gained, Dad, from people throughout Black history.
Well, one of the things, son, I'm always asked, "How are you doing?" That Pastor, how you doing? Rickey Harvey, how you doing? Whatever the title they have for me, it's how you doing. And when I respond, 95% of the times, it's I'm fabulous. That's what I sort of said this at church today. And the reason for that is having believed the lessons and adhered to the lessons that I learned from legends. And I'll go back to the late Reverend Dr. E.V. Hill when I first started this journey of pastoring. I had the opportunity to drive E.V. Hill in my early days, in my early 20s, and driving E.V. Hill then was like driving T.D. Jakes now.
Wow.
And I was pastoring what I call my first real church. That's the church where whatever name I got, that name was established in Memphis. And I was going through a period where I couldn't do this, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do this, and I couldn't do this. And I had Dr. E.V. Hill in the car on my way to the famous four-way grill. Speaking of Black history, that's where Blacks could only go at one point in the city of Memphis. And I shared with him what I couldn't do and I couldn't do and I couldn't do. And I was so amazed at how attentive he was at listening and the things that I told him I couldn't do. And we got to the restaurant. He asked me, so they won't let you do this. No, sir, they won't let you do this. And in those days, Rick, I had what they call a steno pad with my pen ready to write take the advice that Dr. Hill would give me. And the advice he gave me after regurgitating everything I said to him about what people would not let me do, Dr. Hill says, well, I'll tell you what to do. If you can't do this and you can't do this and they won't let you do this and they won't let you do this, he says, this is what you do. Do what you can.
Wow.
I sat there really with my mouth open because I was waiting on a dissertation from him. But I later learned some of the best advice that I ever received in my almost 40 years of pastoral ministry.
Wow.
And some of the best advice I've ever been able to give other young pastors is and was do what you can.
Wow.
And listen, I've been happy, really, the majority of my pastoral ministry because what I have done has been doing what I can do.
Everybody, if you will you type that in the chat? Say, do what you can.
Do what you can.
Dad, I think that's such a huge lesson because so often we get stuck being concerned about the things we can't do.
Right.
That we spend so much energy complaining about the people and the things that are challenging us that we don't embrace the opportunity to do what we can do. And while that was a lesson for you for ministry, I think it's a lesson for all of us for life. That while there are things you can't do, there are still things that you can. I may not be able to get to where I think I want to go, but I can get somewhere. I can move from here. And I think if we would embrace the concept of doing what you can, it's going to inspire us to keep going even further. I'll share. Go ahead, Ed.
So for me, the lessons that I've learned in life, as we talk about lessons learned in leadership, have always been little small things. It's not been dissertations. Rick, the Reverend Dr. Odie Williams, when I went into a pulpit for the second time in my life, and I guess I would add, my lessons came very early. I was asked to read a scripture. And and when you're in the pulpit for the second time, you don't know Genesis from Revelation. And I was running through the Bible real fast, and I didn't ask for this advice, but he put his hands on my knee and he said to me, take your time.
Mm.
I didn't take your time just to mean for the scripture.
Wow.
I applied that take your time for my life of ministry and for my life period. And so listen, tell our followers right now to drop that in the comments. Say, take your time.
Wow.
Take your time. Take your time.
That's big because the pressure to perform will provoke you to rush during the very things in life where taking our time and being more intentional will help us to be more effective in life. I think that those are some great kind of historical things for us to remember, that I am not in a rush, nor am I in a race.
That's right. You're not in a. That's excellent. You're not in a rush, and you're not in a race. So if you take your time, you're more likely to get it right the first time if you take your time.
Yeah, I think that's important, Dad, because sometimes I believe in the ideology that if you waste not, you will want not.
Wow.
And our energy is sometimes spent and wasted. Now you got to go back in a race.
Sure.
You know, some of the resources you used cannot be regained and retained, all because we rush through things in life. Right. And so I think that in life, we have to take our time. That's an old adage of the church. Take your time. That's a standard when folks doing well, when they're not doing well. Taking your time is a method is a classical historical method of the Black church. Get your footing.
Yeah.
Get comfortable.
Yeah.
Settle down.
Yeah.
And do your thing.
Yeah. Let me give you this one, and then you talk about this. The late Cassetta George, Cassietta Baker George was her Memphis name. She was Cassetta George across the country, but Cassietta Baker George, walk around heaven. She told me in my early days, be gone when you ain't gone. Which was to say, don't try to accept every invitation that comes your way. Sometimes you've got to take off so that you can prepare and be ready when you do go out, rather than go. It's not the go. It's not your calendar that determines your greatness or your power or your success. It's your effectiveness.
Wow.
And if you're gone every day, as young preachers like to be, or people in any particular field, like, they measure their success by the number of invitations that they get to do what they do.
Sure.
And Cassetta George taught me that you cannot accept every invitation that comes your way and have the effect or the affect either that you would hope to have in ministry. So sometimes you've got to be gone when you ain't gone.
Yeah, I think that's great. What I hear in that is the modern way of saying that is a reference to self-care.
Yeah.
That if you don't care for one thing about people, people will use you up to their own benefit, and they will replace you when you run out of whatever they like you for.
Absolutely. You
better learn. Here's a lesson learned. Take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself.
Look out for yourself. I did some ministry today after church, Dad, and I was able to share with someone that your priority has to be your wholeness and not just your wellness. Because this is what we like to do.
Yeah.
We like to say, hey, I got money. Hey, I got a successful career. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
popular. Hey, I'm a high level professional in this area. And
Sure.
all of that speaks to wellness, but
Sure.
wholeness is different because wholeness is more comprehensive.
Sure.
Wholeness requires more intentionality. Wholeness requires that I give attention not just to the areas that people like about me, but I give attention to the areas sometimes that people don't see about me. Here is a lesson learned for me, Dad.
All right.
Not to celebrate my wellness so much that I ignore my need for wholeness. Everybody say that word, wholeness. That's what we ought to be seeking to attain.
Yeah.
That's what we ought to be seeking to become, because a whole self is able to say no to somebody, be gone when you ain't gone, right?
Yeah.
And not think less of myself because, hey, I'm whole. If I don't get this opportunity, if I don't get this platform, if I don't get this payday, I'm whole.
Yeah.
And out of a sense of wholeness, I think that's the only way that we can have the sense of confidence where we can be willing to say no to others so that we can say yes to ourselves.
Yeah. Let me drop this one on you and see what you do with this, Rick. Consequently, it seems like my lessons came from a lot of preachers who have gone on. Kenneth Whalum, of the Olivet Baptist Church in Memphis, had a thing that he said, be who you is. If you ain't who you is, then you is who you are. Be yourself. Be yourself. Be yourself. And that was a great lesson for me because in my early days, you saw the great young preachers. Young preachers like to be like the other, what they call young preachers. And I dare not start calling names tonight, but I remember some years ago, even since I've been here in Rochester, young preachers called me and they said that he's trying to be like him. And I had to share with them, well, he's really not somebody to be like. He has not even obtained himself. He doesn't have a self to be like. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Hadn't preached 5 sermons, but because of a couple of invitations does not make you to be who you are. You come into this, you learn yourself, and then you be yourself. Nobody can beat you being you. Everybody can beat you being somebody else, but nobody can beat you being you. When God made you, he fearfully and wonderfully made you. So when he gifted you, he gave you a unique gift. He made you a unique self. And I would admit that that's something that we all have to learn. That is a lesson that we have to learn because we want to be like so bad. When you realize that God has made you somebody that he made nobody else like you. So be yourself. That's been a help for me to be yourself.
I think that's a huge thing. I'm inspired by that because for me, being yourself requires personal evolution because self does not exist as a finish line. It is a destination.
Right.
The dad, who you are today is so yourself now is so different than your version of self 10 years ago, which is so different than your version of self when you pastored in Tucson, which is so different than your version of self when you pastored in Memphis, when you pastored in Mississippi, when you weren't a pastor, that you will be 20 years from now. And so self is a journey and not a destination. And I'm afraid that we will only experience failure when we use image self as a stop instead of a journey kind of experience.
Now, let me admit to that until you find yourself, then you don't know what being yourself is.
Sure.
And one of the ways that Jasper Williams, who's a mentor of mine as well, said, he says, and I guess I'm going to relate this to preachers, Rick, since that's what you and I do.
Sure.
He said to us almost 40 years ago, he said, if you listen to his early tapes, he sounded just like C.L. Franklin.
Yeah.
He said, if you listen to him in my early days, I walked like Frank. I sat like Frank. I moved like Frank. I did everything like Frank until I found myself.
Yeah.
In my early days, there were preachers, my own pastor, Reverend Melvin Rogers, Reverend Jasper Williams, Frank Ray, and so many others that I pulled a little from here, I pulled a little from there, a little from there, a little from there. And in time, you're absolutely right. In time, you develop a self, you find yourself. And once you find yourself, and God will help you to find yourself if that's what you're working on. And so I found myself, and you're absolutely right. I'm not the preacher today that I was in Memphis or Tucson, and people ask me, what's the best church for you? When I go back to Tucson, they ask me, is your church in New York a better church than us? Or what's the Memphis church best? And my response is this. When I was pastoring in Mississippi, that was the best church for me at that time.
Yeah.
And when I pastored in Moscow, Tennessee, that church was the best church for me at that time. Of course, Memphis was the best church for me at that time. And when I went to Tucson in my 30s, that was the best church for me at that time. And so where I am now is the best church for me at this time in my life. So the best church for me has always been the church that God had me at. God had me in. So I don't have a which church is the best.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a great way to see life, that I am in a great position. I think we can mess up we can mess up discrediting the opportunities and positions we have. And I think the attitude that you just expressed speaks to giving some credence and credit to my current reality, with my station in life. That if you don't find something to celebrate about who you are and where you are, it's unrealistic to expect other people to.
So you might learn in life that I am where I am supposed to be.
Wow.
And I am doing what I supposed to be doing. You know, Dad had a road life. You know, there was a time when I had a road life and I was gone 30 plus weeks out of the year. And when I was supposed to be doing that, I did that.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with the life that I had at that time. But that's not my life now. And so here are a couple of things. You know, a lot of times when people no longer do what they did, they hate on the ones who are now doing what they used to do.
Yeah.
And I've seen, and it's unfortunate that a lot of us are preachers who throw shade on the young preachers who are coming up, and they're not replacing us because we are moving to new places.
Right.
So every time you think that we are being replaced, you're going to a new place, and a new place, and a new place, and a new place. So I think if we older guys can gracefully accept the new places that God continues to take us to,
wow,
and we can continue to do like the Whalums and the older pastors who were mentors for me. Rick, I think one of you guys, you young pastors' problems is the mentors that we had who poured into us the way they did. I don't see you guys having as many mentors as we had, certainly as I had coming along. And I think that's not good for young preachers. It's not good for any young professional. Everybody needs, uh, Joshua had a Moses.
Yeah.
And everybody needs a mentor, a leader, somebody who has paved the way.
Yeah.
To kind of tell you where the pitfalls are, to tell you what roads to travel and what roads not to travel. And I was very fortunate in my journey then to have people leading me. And I trusted them and I trusted their advice. Now, here's another thing. Whereas young preachers in my day, we accepted leadership. I see young preachers now who don't accept it like we accept it. It may be because of the money that they're making, the fame that they're getting. It could be social media, or I don't know what causes young professionals now. And we are professionals, and there's no sense we can call it what it is. We are professionals. We've gone to school. We prepared ourselves. We make livings doing what we do, even though it's for God. This is our profession. And I'm not sure if it's because we're doing it at such a young age now, but my prayer is that there will always be mentors and mentees in this line of work that we do, because we need the wisdom of the old. We need the strength of the young and the wisdom of the old to be successful in kingdom work.
Yeah, Dad, when I think about my own journey, I must say that one of the things that has benefited me most deeply has been guidance from people who have been mentors for me, namely you.
Mm-hmm.
I can name a Marvin McMickle who has deeply shaped who I am in ministry, even now here in Maryland with Robert Turner. Just the sage level guidance and advice has made all the difference for me. And some of that even plays out in, I want to pivot with that in mind to what I would call unexpected challenges.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Unexpected challenges. Let's talk about that, because that has something to do with everybody, even in our nation, right? Our nation, our world is mourning the ridiculous murder of Tyree Nichols in our hometown, Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm amazed at the horrific way that he was murdered, of course, at the hands of police, and the news story is widespread. But I'm also amazed at the reality that this conversation series that we do is on leadership and life. And one of the things you taught me years ago, you may not even remember, you probably do, is to never take it personal. That when people attack us, if people mistreat you, if people see you in a negative light, to never take it personal. This Tyree scenario kind of shakes me, because this was a personal attack that he was ignorant of, but that he suffered at the hands of. And so when I think about our lives as religious leaders, as businessmen, as humans, I want to have some conversation around how do you handle when people's harm to you is personal and they intend to hurt you? How do you handle that?
Well, that's a good question because I don't really think that we oftentimes are aware really of our enemies.
It's true.
I don't think that we
Wow.
are aware of the people that might that might hate us or want to see harm done in our lives. The Memphis situation is so hurtful because of one, the history of Memphis.
Yeah.
Just the history alone. I tell it every chance I get. 4 years old, remember holding on to your grandmother's leg and watching helicopters. And I see people like your auntie, Sister Luella Patrick, who would remember this story when helicopters were flying downtown Memphis. Dr. Martin Luther King had come into the city of Memphis to fight for
Sanitation work.
sanitation workers, people who were working for the city, people who were working for the city to have the equal rights as others. And I even heard Dr. Sharpton say, and some says he stole it from me. I don't know whether he did or not, but I said it first. Once we got our rights, it was just heartbreaking when people called me and asked me, that I realized what had happened in Memphis, and I heard that an African American had been beat up by cops. It just didn't even dawn on me. It just didn't dawn on me that we did that.
Wow.
And so the fact that we have marched, we have protested, we have put up Black Lives Matter, we have done so much to fight for ourselves against the other people, whoever they are, against them. So to see that happened in our city, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. It is embarrassing. It's painful. And even as I talk about it now, I feel the pain as if I knew Tyree Nichols.
Me too.
I feel the pain for his mother. I feel the pain for his son. I feel the pain for his father. We talk about mothers all the time, but fathers love their children too. And I am a father and I love my children. I don't think there is anybody, a mother or anybody who loves their children any more than I do. So I feel the pain for his family, but to see that happening, it's embarrassing to say the least.
Yeah, I am one who, in my mourning of Tyree's life, again, it makes me consider the potential in our lives and our journeys for, I've been so wired not to take so much of the harm that people inflict on, especially in ministry, right? We're wired, oh yeah, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. True. We're so wired to say, oh, it's not about you. It's just about your position. Don't take it personal.
This was personal.
This was personal.
Yeah.
And managing personal attack is hard to do when you're outnumbered like Tyree was.
Yeah.
When the force of others outweighs your ability to cover yourself when you don't have help, and I am concerned about Black people, but in the context of our conversation, I'm concerned about leaders. I'm concerned about religious leaders, pastors, who in that Tyree Nichols metaphor, we suffer the violence of evil people or mean-hearted people who don't realize the impact of their force.
And in addition to that, people who in moments lose it to the point that not only do they not have regard for the person that they're harming, but they have no regard for themselves. They have no regard for their parents. Those are young. For me, they're boys. They're men. But for me, at that age, they're young. They're very young. They're like sons to me. They're your age. And so they have no regard for their siblings. Some of them had children. Some of them have children. They have parents. They have families. They have careers. They got house notes to pay, car notes to pay, insurance to pay. So they literally were so overtaken by evil and meanness and madness and get back at you for some reason, that they lost regard for themselves. And when people lose regard for themselves, they have no regard for others.
Wow.
I see somebody saying he weighed 140 pounds and 5 men beating him down, kicking him, tasing him, using the stick on him, using every means necessary to break his life, to ruin his life, to end his life as they did. I can only say God have mercy. But with that being said, it continues to shed a light on what happens to us.
Yeah.
What happens to that would not have happened to a white young man. I hate to say a white boy, but that wouldn't have happened we wouldn't have done that to a white boy. But there is a disdain for African Americans. And Rick, I say it like this. Behaviors are learned behaviors.
Wow.
And so when we still talk about systemic racism and where do these behaviors come from? This is still a learned behavior. What we did is duplicated something that we saw others. That's not us. We don't do that.
Wow.
And to see us duplicating, we always want to do what they do. We move to their neighborhoods. We get the same kind of cars, the same kind of houses. We start wearing Dockers and we start doing the things that they do. We always want to do what they do. And this is, I call it systemic racism. I don't care if they were Black. They were doing things that they learned from themselves as policemen. And
we've seen historically, when we talk about Black history, we have seen historically, even as it relates to the transatlantic slave trade, where Black villagers were selling their own people to European slave traders, which is to say that white supremacy has historically been, that Black people have historically participated in harmful white supremacist behavior. And so white supremacy is not about whiteness. Right. It is about the subjugation of Black people by anybody. Yeah. And we need to know that.
The issue is the victims. It's not always who the villain, the villains are, is who the victims are.
Correct.
It's always us. It's always us. Let's call it. I'm driving my car. When I'm on the police accountability board here in Rochester, which means I'm on a board that's designed to hold policemen accountable for those behaviors.
Yeah.
But when policemen get behind me in my car, I'm looking for the first open place that I can get to with lights, with people to turn in, because a police being behind you could mean your life within the next 10 minutes could be zapped away from you just like that. And those people are supposed to be trained, educated, and take an oath to protect us. And yet we as Black men have a fear that's crazy for what we have to go through in our city, in all of our cities. And I was just taken to know that this happened in Memphis.
Yeah, I I think we're hurt if it happens. It's so close to home, and anywhere a Black person suffers like this is heartbreaking. When I think about,
Well, think about the fact that it's for a traffic violation.
supposedly, they say this is about a woman and all of that, so that stuff is going to come out in court. But
It's going to come out, but the right now it's a traffic violation.
and I think either way, what we saw was evil, and it is a challenge to all of us to, I think it's one of the Proverbs that says, above all else, guard your heart.
Guard your heart, yeah.
Because the same flesh and blood that those officers are made out of, so are we.
Yeah.
And if you don't guard your heart from that evil, from that anger, from that wickedness, we will never know love in our nation. We will never know what it's like to give people the right to dignity, even in justice, right? And so I think that a call to action for those of us who are viewers of that horrific murder, I think a call to action is guard your heart. Yes, fight for legislation. We want to see the Eric Garner and all of the other legislation that is coming through to protect Black people. But at the end of the day, the wickedness in human hearts keeps white supremacist harm happening to Black people.
Well, I'll tell you another thing that's of concern to me is, in as much as it was a horrific thing that the 5, 6, 7, or 10 policemen did, they were within 20 days fired, jailed, and indicted.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see, and that's one of the things we're pushing for, is the blueprint for how to move forward, going forward, when these things happen to us again. The blueprint has been laid out for us, that we don't have to wait for 6 months, eight months, allow a family to divorce and separate their possessions so that they don't lose anything. Follow this same blueprint.
Yeah.
When it happens to us from the other side. Now, that's one of the things that's being talked about a lot. Is it happened quick.
Yeah.
They took care. They made judgment on them. They which rightfully so.
Sure.
So, but when it happens to us with the other people, do the same thing.
I agree. I'm gonna tell you what, Dad. Here's a question, because Tyree was a victim of an unwarranted attack. And sometimes so are we.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you maintain a high standard of self when sometimes we experience such a low version of other people?
Well, we're going to experience that. That can happen on a daily basis. Experiencing a low version of other people can happen on a daily basis, and unfortunately, it can happen even in church. You can get worse from attitudes. But this situation with Tyree Nichols is beyond what we experience in our daily walk. People hating on you because you got on a name brand, or because of the car that you're driving, your eyewear, your arm wear, your weave, your wig. You know, we've got to, somewhere in that Bible it says, set your affections on things that are above.
Yeah.
That means relationships. I mean, if the relationship with the man and the woman ain't working, it just ain't working.
Wow.
And set your affections on God. And that's the last one to be churchy. I don't like to get churchy, but Rick, I got upset with the former mayor of Rochester because when I did the speech last Tuesday night on Tyree Nichols, I could talk about Memphis great, but I wanted to talk about where do we go from here?
Mm.
Because we can all talk about the problems. And I know the
Correct.
former mayor is a man that I have a lot of respect for. And I left several calls for him to call me back. Come to find out I was leaving the messages on his home phone. You know, none of us check those messages. And when he got back with me, it was past the time. But I told him I wanted his expertise because he's the former mayor. He's given government leadership to our city, and he continues to do that. And I asked him, what would you say for next steps? Because I talked about we've got to have forgiveness in our hearts. We've got to have love in our hearts. We've got to return back to God. We've got to turn back to the golden rule, loving one another, doing unto others as you would have others do unto us. And when I talked to Mayor Bill Johnson, he says, well, that's a complex question in terms of where do we go from here? And if we had the answer today, then we would not have the problems that we have. And he continued to say, went on to say, it is going back to God.
Mm.
It is. We somehow or another, it all comes back to how important your job is as a preacher and how important my job is as a preacher. And it's a God-sized blessing, a God-sized healing. It's a God-sized delivery. Rick, I really don't think it matters whether it's a Democrat or Republican, it's one that we don't want in there that it would make a difference. But typically, it does not matter if we don't get back to God.
Yeah.
And we're in a position now where we said church ain't like it used to be. And we are accepting the fact that church ain't like it used to be. Well, we've got to get those ingredients that kept killing and hatred and dislove and dislike. Those ingredients have got to come back into the church. And somehow or another, whether it's virtual church or whatever the church is, we've got to do something in the houses of worship, whatever our house of worship is. We've got to get people back to God.
I appreciate something Turner said today. He did 2 Chronicles 7:14. And when he started, that text talking about my people called by my name, humble themselves and pray. He really parked there. And when he talked about humility, he talked about humility being a vantage point about the insufficiency of self and the all-sufficiency of God. And I think that if there is, to your point about the mandate about the church, that 2 Chronicles text, God talks to Solomon about my people.
My people. I talked about that a little bit today too.
Yes, you and Turner was in the same spirit, right? And so that there are some mandates for we who belong to God that, yes, we need legislation. Yes, we need policy. Yes, we need government intervention. And foremost, the first thing we need is for the church to be the church. God's people to respond in God's way for us to experience healing in our land. And that is not some superficial scapegoat for us not to adequately use our natural resources to accomplish natural work, but it is to say, for believers, we have a formula that is invisible.
And without us using that formula, we're going to continue to see what we're seeing, do what we're doing. Did some studying in the Old Testament, the minor prophets, and throughout the minor prophets, there is a continuing theme, and it's return. Return my people, return my people, return to God,
Yeah,
return.
everybody help us. There are a number of us still on hanging out. Thank y'all. It's been an hour almost. Everybody, seriously, if you can, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are, say the word return. That is the mandate to get back to the place in submission and surrender to God, where we are aligned to God's expectation. I see God like an ocean and us like a straw. And when we align ourselves, we expand and the flow of God. Come on, y'all say it. Return, return, because that is the mandate that we have, the opportunity we have. We want to see God move. Go back. Go back to that place of submission and surrender to God. And I think that's huge. That minor prophet ministry to provoke God's people to return.
Come back, come back.
Wow.
Come back. Return means that your forefathers once were here, and generations now have gotten wiser. Look at the generations now. Even when I look at the young preachers, Rick, when I look at you and I compare you to me, and what you got now took me 30 years to get. That's good, but we're wiser and weaker.
Wow.
And if that's happening in our churches, look at what's happening in the world. We've got to return. God is saying, come back.
Yeah.
We wonder, where is the answer? And can I tell you what I'm fed up with?
Wow.
Is meetings.
Me too.
Meetings. We meet. I don't know what's happening in your city, Rick, but in my city, we meet to talk about what's going on in our city. And all we do is we talk about it, and then we go to another meeting to talk about what's going on in our city. It's different people with the same agenda, but the truth is, some way and somehow, we've got to get our people back to God.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to talk about styles of preaching or preaching, and more than preaching, reaching.
Yeah.
Everybody is preaching.
Wow.
But few of us are reaching. And so we've got to stop being so focused on the preach and focus on the reach.
Wow.
Because if you are preaching and not reaching, you're not preaching.
Wow.
You're talking. You might be singing, you might be talking, you might be mumbling, but if you're not reaching, it ain't preaching.
Wow.
Preaching is reaching. And somehow or another, I don't care what style you use, I don't care what method you use, but we have got to make our preaching effective.
That, for me, provokes a sense of responsibility. That my minor in college and undergrad was communication.
Yeah.
And one of the things they taught us, Dad, is that it is the communicator's responsibility,
Right,
to ensure that the communicatee understands and can grasp the message.
Rick, I just got to stop right here and tell you, that reminds me, some years ago, I was staying at the convention, and one of the pastors it was known that he was having problems in his church.
Uh-huh.
Met with him and said, "Hey, Doc, what's going on?" He says, "My folk are mad. They're ignorant." I said, "Well, ignorant?" I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm preaching over their heads, and they can't understand a word that I'm saying. They're ignorant." I'm like, who do you really think is the ignorant one?
Wow.
You preaching over their head, you coming in every Sunday with Greek, and they can't understand English. You're spending all your time with the Hebrew and the Greek and the Latin.
Wow.
And you're missing the English. And so you said it right when you said it's the communicator. It's our job.
It's our job.
It's our job.
to make it plain.
Rick, you know what I like? You know what? Yes, it's our job. But you know what I like to say? That it's our calling.
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
It's what God made us for. It's our purpose. We are built, Jasper Williams said, we are built. That's why he built us.
Wow.
To communicate him to his people. And if we're not doing that, we should take up another profession, maybe become garbage collectors or car salesmen or something, because we are not doing this job the way God intended for us to do it.
Wow.
And the old people say we're going to be held accountable for it. Rick, our time is almost gone, but I'm just so what have I done as a result of this? I stopped trying to preach pretty. And now I try to preach purposefully. I try to preach purposefully. I try. And I'm not just saying me. I listen to some of my friends. I listen to you. I listen to Reverend Turner. And I think what this society, the beautiful thing, you know, the Bible says all things work together for good. And Tyree Nichols is not exempt from an all thing. That's an all thing too.
Wow.
And one of the things that I believe, like you said, what your pastor preached today, what these all things are doing is they are forcing us to leave the fat out and bring the preaching, bring the word. You mentioned he stuck a pin in humility.
Yeah.
And prayer. And so I think that's what's happening. And so to God be the glory. May Tyree Nichols rest in the arms of Jesus the way Abraham rested in his bosom. May he rest in peace for the rest of eternity, and may his family find peace with God. But may we who take claimage to God's word become more effective, become more concerned with the message than the method. Am I going to hoop? Am I going to talk? Am I going to sing? I preached one Sunday, white lady came to the church. She said, "Oh, you sung that sermon really nicely." She said, "I love the way I was hooping good, I thought." And the white lady said, "Oh, I love the way you sung that sermon." So we've got to do better in the pulpit, Rick.
Yeah. I think, and we're closing now. That's our hour, Dad. What a mandate to make the aim to be a great reacher and not just a great preacher.
That's it.
I love you, Dad. Thanks for being on. Family, y'all take care. Have a great night. See you next first Sunday, every first Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Looking forward to that. See you next month.
Deuces.
All right.